Hello.
My name is Daniel. I'm 29 years old, and I've been living on the fourth floor of this building for just over 3 years. I moved here after leaving a smaller apartment across town that always smelled faintly of cooking oil from the diner below. This place felt quieter from the moment I first walked in. The hallways are carpeted in muted gray, the kind that mutes footsteps, and the walls hold the soft scent of old wood and a little dust. Most of the neighbors keep to themselves. Polite nods in the hallway, short hellos in the elevator. I work from home, so I'm here more than most. My days follow a routine I could recite without thinking. Coffee, laptop, the soft clink of the kettle when I fill it at noon, a few pages of a book before bed. It's a comfortable life, though sometimes I realize I've gone days without any real conversation. It was early evening, the sky outside turning from pale blue to the first hints of gold and gray. I'd stepped out to drop a bag of recycling in the chute at the end of the hall. The corridor was still, the kind of still that feels deeper because you expect some sound. Music from a neighbor's speaker, the hum of a TV. But there was nothing. Halfway back to my door, I noticed hers. The apartment directly opposite mine had its door open just a crack. Warm amber light spilled out, laying a soft stripe across the dull carpet. She was there, leaning lightly against the frame. My neighbor. Her hair was pulled back into a loose knot, a few strands falling along her face. She wore a pale gray sweater that hung easily against her frame and dark leggings. Her eyes followed me in a way that felt both casual and deliberate. "Heading back in?" she asked, her voice low but clear. "Yeah," I said, lifting the bag slightly. "Just taking this out." She glanced over her shoulder into her apartment, as if checking something unseen, then looked back at me. "Do you have a minute?" I stopped, the question catching me off guard. "Sure." She stepped aside, the door opening wider. Crossing the threshold, I felt the change instantly. Her apartment was warm, not just in temperature, but in a way that felt layered. A faint scent of something floral drifted under the sharper aroma of fresh tea. Light from a lamp in the corner painted the shelves and cushions in gold, softening every edge. On the coffee table sat an open book and a half-empty mug, its steam curling lazily. A folded throw blanket rested neatly on the back of the couch. It wasn't staged, it was lived in but cared for. I closed the door behind me, the latch clicking softly. She turned toward me, her expression unreadable, then said, "You can stay, but only if you promise not to tell." The words hung there between us, not heavy like a warning, but with a kind of weight all the same. Not playful, but not entirely serious either, like something that could tip either way. "Not to tell who?" I asked, smiling slightly. She shook her head, a faint movement. "That's not part of the deal. Just promise." I held her gaze for a second longer than necessary, then nodded. "All right, I promise." Her lips curved in the smallest smile. "Good. Sit." I chose the end of the couch nearest the lamp. The cushions gave easily, and the light made the space feel even warmer. She took the opposite end, curling one leg beneath her, holding her mug with both hands. The steam rose in thin ribbons, carrying that same soft scent I'd noticed earlier. "I didn't mean to interrupt your evening," she said, glancing briefly toward the bag I'd set by the door. "You didn't," I replied. "I wasn't doing anything important." She nodded at that as if pleased. Sometimes it's nice just to have someone here, even if there's no reason for it. I let my eyes travel slowly across the room. Bookshelves lined with mismatched spines, a ceramic dish on the windowsill holding a single key, a candle burned halfway down. The details felt personal, not arranged for guests. She caught me looking. "You can ask questions," she said. "I'm just looking," I told her. "It's warm in here." Her smile softened. "Thanks. Want some tea?" "That would be great." She rose and moved to the kitchen, her footsteps muted on the rug. The faint rush of water came first, then the metallic click of the stove's ignition. I heard the soft clink of ceramic, the whisper of a jar lid turning. From my seat, I could see her silhouette framed against the kitchen light, moving unhurriedly, as though each step belonged exactly where it was. When she returned, she handed me a mug. Our fingers brushed briefly. Light, accidental, but enough to notice. "Careful," she said. "It's hot." I took a sip, the warmth settling in my chest. She settled back into her place, pulling the folded blanket across her lap. "This is nice," she said again, quieter. I didn't ask if she meant the tea, the company, or something else entirely. Some things I thought are better left unanswered for now. She adjusted the blanket over her lap, tucking it under her legs as though settling in for a conversation that might last a while. I set my mug down on the coaster in front of me, letting my hands rest loosely on my knees. The quiet between us didn't feel awkward. It was the kind that has weight to it, as though each second is being quietly acknowledged by both people. "So," she began, her tone casual but deliberate. "You've been here, what? A few years now." "3," I said. "Just over." She nodded as though filing that away. "And in all that time, we've barely spoken." I gave a small shrug. Hallway greetings don't really count as conversations. Her mouth curved slightly. "No, I guess they don't." She took a slow sip from her mug, her eyes drifting toward the window. The lamplight caught in her hair, giving it a faint golden edge. Outside, I could hear the soft patter of rain starting up against the glass. Came gradually, like the sound had been there all along and I'd only just noticed. She turned her gaze back to me. "You work from home, right?" "Most of the time," I said, "which means I probably know the sound of the elevator better than anyone in this building." She laughed quietly at that, a short, warm sound. "I suppose that's true." The rain picked up, the drops now distinct and steady. She reached forward to set her mug down on the table, then leaned back into the couch, drawing the blanket closer around her. "It's nights like this I like best," she said. "When the weather gives you an excuse to stay in." "An excuse you didn't need tonight," I said. Her smile deepened just a touch. "Maybe not." We spoke about simple things for a while. The quirks of the building, the neighbor on the second floor who always leaves his door open when he cooks, the way the street outside is quieter since the cafe down the block closed. Her voice had a rhythm to it, an easy flow that made the conversation feel more like an exchange of moments than words. At one point, I asked about the book on her table. She glanced at it, then back at me. "It's not great," she said, "but I keep reading anyway. Habit, maybe." "I know that feeling," I said. "Sometimes it's not about the story. It's about the time you've already put into it." She nodded, considering that. "Exactly." The rain softened again, fading into a gentle background hum. She reached for her mug once more, cradling it between her hands without drinking. "Do you like living here?" she asked suddenly. "I do," I said. "It's quiet. Familiar." "Familiar can be nice," she said, her eyes steady on mine. "But it can also make you forget what's outside it." I didn't answer right away. There was something in the way she said it, something that felt like it belonged to her more than to me. Before I could respond, She smiled faintly and changed the subject. I have some chocolate in the kitchen. Would you like some? Sure, I said. She disappeared into the kitchen, her steps soft, and I heard the quiet rustle of a cupboard opening, the faint clink of plates. When she returned, she placed a small plate between us, neatly arranged with squares of dark chocolate. We each took one, the faint bitterness a contrast to the tea. She leaned back, her gaze flicking to the window, then back to me. See? Staying in isn't so bad. No, I said. It's not bad at all. And for a while we didn't speak. The rain, the lamp, the faint warmth from the tea. Everything seemed to settle into place, as though the room itself had decided to be still. The rain outside settled into a steady rhythm, the kind that fills the silence without pressing against it. I let my gaze drift toward the window, watching how the droplets blurred the streetlights into soft halos of gold and white. She followed my line of sight, then spoke quietly, almost as if continuing a thought she'd been having to herself. I like nights like this, she said, when you can hear the world, but it's somewhere else. Out there. Not here. I nodded. It makes the walls feel warmer somehow. She smiled faintly, but her eyes stayed on the window. I used to hate the sound of rain. It made me restless. Now it feels like the only thing that keeps me still. Her voice had changed, softer, slower. I didn't push with questions, though I wanted to. Instead, I asked, "What changed?" She glanced at me briefly, then away again. I guess I realized it's one of the few things you can't rush. It starts, it stops, and nothing you do will change how long it lasts. There was a quiet in her words, a weight I couldn't name. I took another sip of tea, letting the warmth linger. She turned back toward me, her expression lighter now. "What about you? You ever feel like you've been in the same place for too long?" I thought about it before answering. Sometimes, but then I remind myself I chose this place. That counts for something. It does, she agreed, leaning back into the couch. She adjusted the blanket so it covered her feet, then reached for another square of chocolate. Though sometimes, she added, the place chooses you. I tilted my head slightly. Is that what happened to you? Her smile was small, almost private. Maybe. She let the word hang there for a moment, then changed direction entirely. Do you cook? Enough to keep myself alive, I said. That earned a soft laugh from her. I'm the same, though I do make a decent soup when I try. She set her mug down again, then tucked her hands under the blanket. The lamplight made her face look softer, as though the shadows had decided to fall gently tonight. For a while we talked about food, what we made when we were too tired to think, the little recipes we remembered from growing up. Her voice carried a warmth that had nothing to do with the tea. Somewhere between describing her grandmother's bread and telling me about a kitchen disaster she'd had last winter. She caught my gaze and held it for a fraction longer than before. There was something unspoken there, a recognition of the quiet comfort we'd slipped into. When she looked away, she reached for her mug again. You know, she said slowly, you didn't ask me why I said what I did earlier. I felt the corner of my mouth lift. You mean about not telling? She nodded. I figured you'd tell me if you wanted to, I said. Her smile deepened, but she didn't answer. Instead, she took a slow sip of tea, her eyes holding mine over the rim of the cup. Then she set it down and leaned back, letting the blanket wrap more tightly around her. The rain softened again, almost fading to a whisper. The room seemed to follow its lead. She glanced toward the bookshelf in the corner, tilting her head slightly. Actually, can I ask you for a favor? Sure, I said. She pointed with a small gesture. There's a box on the top shelf over there. I can't reach it without dragging a chair across the room, and I'm afraid I'll knock over half the books. I set my mug down and stood, crossing the soft rug toward the corner. The lamp cast a warm glow across the spines, each one a different height and shade. I spotted the box, a narrow, flat one pushed back against the wall. Standing on my toes, I slid it forward carefully. When I turned back, she was watching me with a faint smile, her hands folded loosely in her lap. Thanks, she said as I set the box on the coffee table. What's in it? I asked, settling back onto the couch. She brushed her fingertips over the lid as if deciding whether to open it. Just some old letters and photos. I've been meaning to sort through them. The way she said it made me think she'd been meaning to for a long time. She didn't open it, though, just pushed it a little closer to her side of the table and let it sit there. Do you like having a lot of books? I asked, glancing again at the shelves. They make a place feel lived in, she said. Even if you don't read them all, they still hold pieces of other people's thoughts. That's a nice way to put it. She shrugged lightly, a small smile playing at her lips. It's true. For a few minutes, we spoke about the books on the shelves, each title sparking a short memory or opinion. Some she admitted to never finishing, others she said she'd read twice. At one point, I noticed the rain outside had shifted again, heavier now, tapping against the window in steady bursts. The sound made the room feel even more enclosed, as if the world beyond had blurred into nothing but gray. She followed my gaze toward the window. Looks like you're stuck here for a while, she said, though her tone carried more warmth than warning. Could be worse, I replied. Her smile lingered for a moment. Then she reached down to fold the blanket more snugly around herself. If you're going to be stuck, at least be comfortable. I leaned back into the couch, letting the cushions take my weight. The tea was still warm enough to sip, the taste mellowed now. The faint scent of the candle on the windowsill drifted through the room, mixing with the floral note from her tea. She tapped the side of the box with her finger. Maybe I'll look through this later, she said, almost to herself. But not tonight. I didn't ask why. I just nodded, letting the moment stay unbroken. The sound of the rain, the low hum of the building's heating, and the quiet cadence of her breathing settled into a rhythm that felt steady and unhurried. It occurred to me then that the promise I'd made when I walked in, the one about not telling, had already started to feel like part of the room itself, something unspoken but understood. I hadn't realized how long we'd been talking until I noticed the clock on the wall. The hands had slid past 9 without my even thinking about it. The rain outside had softened again, but the streets below still shone slick under the glow of the street lamps. She followed my glance toward the clock and smiled faintly. You're not in a hurry, are you? Not really, I said. Why? She shrugged lightly, her fingers idly tracing the rim of her mug. It's just, the night feels better when you don't rush it. I nodded, settling deeper into the couch. I can stay a while. Good, she said, almost under her breath. The tea had cooled to a comfortable warmth. I took a slow sip, watching her as she adjusted the blanket, tucking it neatly along her side. The lamplight caught the faint texture of her sweater, the small movements of her hands. Outside, a car passed slowly, its tires whispering over wet pavement. The sound faded, leaving the rain and the quiet hum of the heater to fill the space between us. She leaned forward to set her mug down, then rested her elbows on her knees, looking at me with a thoughtful expression. You know, sometimes I forget there are people in this building I've never really met. We live so close, and yet, she let the thought trail off. I know, I said. It's strange how someone can be just a few steps away and still feel like a stranger. Her eyes softened. And yet, here you are. I smiled. Here I am. She leaned back again, drawing the blanket up to her shoulders. It's nice. For a while, we let the quiet settle in again. The kind of quiet that doesn't need to be broken. I found myself studying the details of her apartment again. The way the candlelight shifted against the wall, the gentle curve of the curtain where it met the floor, the subtle shadows in the corners. Everything seemed to belong exactly where it was. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. You could stay a little longer if you want. I looked at her, and she met my gaze steadily. There was no urgency in her tone, just an easy openness, as though the suggestion had been sitting between us for some time. I'd like that, I said. She nodded once, then reached for the plate of chocolate, offering it toward me without a word. I took a piece, the faint bitterness grounding me in the moment. The rain began to pick up again, and I noticed the way her shoulders relaxed at the sound, as if the night outside had agreed to keep us here a while longer. Neither of us mentioned the promise I'd made when I arrived, but I felt it again, like a quiet thread connecting the hours we'd spent together. The clock's hands had crept past 10 when I finally noticed the time again. The rain outside had eased into a faint drizzle, the kind that looked more like mist than water when it caught the streetlight. The air in the apartment felt warmer now, as though it had gathered all the quiet hours we'd been sharing. She shifted slightly, pulling the blanket from her shoulders and folding it neatly on the couch beside her. I suppose I should let you go, she said, but her tone carried none of the usual finality. I set my mug down on the table, noticing the faint ring of steam it had left on the coaster. If you're sure, she smiled, small and deliberate. I'm not, she admitted, but I'll pretend to be. I stood, feeling the slight protest of the cushions as they rose back into shape. She stayed seated for a moment, watching me, then stood as well, smoothing the front of her sweater with one hand. At the door, I turned back to her. The lamplight was still spilling warmly into the room, casting her in that same soft glow I'd seen when I first stepped inside. Thanks for the tea, I said. You're welcome. She hesitated, then added, and remember, I know, I said, smiling. I promised. Her eyes held mine for a beat longer, as if she were deciding whether to say more. In the end, she didn't. She just reached for the door, opening it slowly, the quiet of the hallway meeting us like a cool breath. I stepped out, the muted carpet soft under my feet. She leaned lightly against the frame, just as she had when I first saw her that evening. Good night, Daniel, she said. Good night. I crossed the hall to my own door, the key cool in my hand. For a moment, I thought I heard her close the door behind me, but when I glanced back over my shoulder, it was still slightly open, that warm amber light spilling just enough to reach the hallway. I didn't linger. I unlocked my door and stepped inside, the quiet of my own apartment somehow different now. The promise I'd made felt heavier than it had when I first spoke it, not in a burdensome way, but in a way that meant it mattered. And as I set my keys down and glanced at the clock, I realized something. The night had ended, but I was certain this wasn't the last time I'd hear her say my name.
Bye bye.